Pleasure to be with all of you at this wonderful conference on sustainable and digital business. I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts on sustainable and digital business. And in fact, I would like to speak about an area of interest of mine for some time, namely frugal innovation. So just bear with me as I share my screen and my presentation. I hope you can all see this. I would like to talk to you today about frugal innovation, how to do more and better with less. So I have spent my career studying innovation, and in the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western companies because the understanding was that's where innovation happens. But then for about 15 years or so, I've now turned my attention to emerging markets like South Asia. I grew up. And when I came to South Asia, India in particular, to talk to innovators, I realized that their approach was very different from their Western corporate counterparts. And they were different in three ways. First, they were very frugal, very good at doing more with less. Second, the mindset of these innovators was very flexible. There was a lot of improvisation and lateral thinking. And third, a lot of their solutions were designed to bring people who are outside the formal economy into the formal economy. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. By way of contrast, here is an innovation we may associate with an affluent society. It is a high-end fridge that will talk to you and you can talk back to via this tablet PC. And for that pleasure, you pay about $3,000. Now, it's a bit of a caricature, but you often see this with large Western corporations. These companies will invest large amounts of money in R&D. They will have big teams that will be working on often pushing the technology frontier for the sake of doing that. And when they come up with some new technology, they will put it into their products to differentiate them, and then they will charge customers for it. Now, you may see something like this in India, but you're equally likely to see something like this. So the high-end fridge is $3,000. This clay fridge is less than $30. It just uses the cooling properties of water in the reservoir at the top, not only to keep the water cool, but also to keep fruit and vegetables fresh for up to 5 days in a hot, dry climate. This is very frugal. It involves a lot of improvisation. And the intention of the innovator is to be inclusive. He wanted to make a fridge for people like himself from villages who would not be able to afford expensive fridges. And even if they could, they may not have electricity to run them. Now, here's another example. This is an incubator. This is a beautiful machine which has all the bells and whistles from a company like GE. But it's about $25,000. And at that price, it is beyond the reach of most people in emerging economies, particularly those in rural areas where the rural clinics will not be able to afford these machines. And even if you give them to them free, they may not have a technician there to maintain them. They may not have regular access to electricity. And in a situation like that, something like this is very powerful. So this incubator is $25,000. This baby warmer is less than $100. Now, of course, it doesn't have an oxygen tent, but it is designed to address a large part of the problem that the incubator is solving, namely the problem of infant mortality. If an infant is born a couple of weeks prematurely, they often cannot maintain their own body temperature. In some cases, they may die. Other cases, they may be very badly affected. This will save them. And importantly, this was not developed by a large company. This was developed by 4 students at Stanford who were taking a course on design for extreme affordability, where the entire objective of the course was to come up with a working prototype that is 1/100th the cost of the existing solution. The students could take any problem. These students took this problem of infant mortality. They came up with this prototype for their course. After they graduated from Stanford, they went on to test it with mothers and midwives in rural Nepal and South India. They got venture capital backing from Stanford. They tested it in the hospital, and then they were ready to launch when they hit a wall. They didn't have a sales force, and at that point, they partnered with GE Healthcare, and GE Healthcare sales force helped them to commercialize it. Now, my co-authors and I, we studied scores of such innovations, not only in India, but in other emerging markets as well. And in India, when we ask people how they would describe this kind of frugal, flexible approach, they would often use this Hindi word Jugaad. So my co-authors and I ended up writing a book called Jugaad Innovation, which we defined as the art of overcoming harsh constraints by improvising an effective solution. So not a perfect solution, but a good enough solution, and importantly, one that makes the best use of limited resources available in that context. And after we published this book, people from other parts of the world wrote to tell us that, hey, we have something similar in our country too. Like in Brazil, they have two words to describe something similar to Jugaad. You see this not only in emerging economies, but also in developed economies of the West. So what we did in this book was to look at lots of examples of such innovations from around the world, particularly emerging markets, and identify some principles that the innovators were guided by. And here are the 6 principles we identified. First, these innovators are very good at finding opportunities in adverse circumstances. For them, necessity is literally the mother of invention. Second, they are very good at doing more with less. They look at the resources they have and use them as substitutes for resources they don't have. Third, the mindset is very flexible. There's a lot of lateral thinking. The idea is that if you cannot climb the mountain, try and find a way around it. Fourth, the solutions are kept simple. This helps to economize, but it also ensures that it's easy to adopt and maintain the solution when you have come up with it. Fifth, they include marginal people not only as customers or beneficiaries, but also as part of the solution. And finally, these people are very passionate about what they're doing, and they have to be, because what they're doing is challenging and requires perseverance over a long period of time. Now, let me introduce you to some of the people we covered in our book, and I'll start with Mansoor Bhai, the person behind the clay fridge. He comes from a village in the Indian state of Gujarat. He has a high school education. He comes from a family of potters. In 2001, there was a very serious earthquake in his state. A lot of people lost their household possessions, including the clay pots or matkas in which they store water. And he says that one morning he opened the local newspaper and there was a picture of someone's matka that was broken. And the caption read as a joke, "Poor man's fridge broken." And that actually made him think, why don't I make a poor man's fridge out of clay? And so this is what he designed. A factory in his village. He trained local women to make these fridges, and he went on to sell them, including on the internet. Now he embodies all those 6 principles I was talking about earlier. He found opportunity in adversity. He did more with less, using resources that he had around him in the village. There's a lot of lateral thinking and improvisation. His solution is very simple. He includes marginal people like himself, not only as potential customers, but he also trains local women in the village. They can work in his factory, gain an additional income. And finally, you can see him on YouTube talking about all his other inventions. You can see how passionate he is. Sort of entrepreneur we cover in our book. This is Dr. Mohan. He's a diabetes specialist in Chennai. He has, unfortunately, diabetes is a very serious problem in many cities, but he has a very successful private practice in Chennai. A lot of people in the city can go to his clinic, and they can even to pay for treatment. So he has come up with this solution. He worked with the World Diabetes Foundation. They gave him this van that you see here and the equipment inside the van. He worked with the Space Research Organization. They gave him the satellite dish. This van goes from village to village. It stops. People like this lady from the village step in. She looks to the piece. The image is broadcast via satellite to the doctor sitting in the city, who can see it on his computer screen and make an instant diagnosis, which he then communicates to this person who's a local health volunteer. So Dr. Mohan identifies people like this from various villages. They go to the city for a few days of training, and then they come back to perform this very important liaison role. So you see lots of these kinds of solutions in healthcare. Now here's a very different sort of context and different sector. This is CellScope. solar electric lighting company set up by Harish Hande in my hometown of Bangalore. Harish had the objective of selling solar lighting solutions to people living off the electricity grid, either in urban slums or the countryside. He realized the first problem was affordability. A lot of the people he was trying to reach could not afford to buy the batteries, panels, and lights. They didn't have bank accounts, they couldn't take loans. He said the best lesson in life he learned was from a fruit cart vendor, a potential client who told him that 300 rupees a month for this was too much, but 10 rupees a day was not. And he realized that a lot of people like the fruit cart vendor earn and spend on a daily basis. And she, at the end of the day, may have 10 rupees to spare to pay for kerosene for lighting. So with that insight, he worked backwards to come up with a business model that you see here in this picture. Harish Hande identifies people like this from the local community who he trains to maintain batteries, panels, and lights. Then often these people don't have bank accounts either. So Harish worked with the bank to give them loans, which Harish guarantees for 6 months. With that loan, this person sets up shop like you see here. He buys batteries, panels, and lights. He charges the batteries during the day. And in the evening, he rents them to people like the fruit cart vendor for 10 rupees a night. With that, her life, the fruit cart vendor's life, is much better off. She gets much better quality solution without changing her behavior or spending more. If she works at home, she can work longer because these lights last longer than kerosene. Her children can read and study, so she's better off. But so too is this person, because after 6 months, he has a credit history and he's in the banking system with his own enterprise. So we see a lot of these kinds of social businesses with ingenious, frugal solutions. But often they struggle to scale, and this is where large organizations come in because they have the resources needed to scale, including multinationals like GE, which has its largest R&D center in the world, again in Bangalore, where they are developing all kinds of solutions, including medical devices, not just for urban India, but also for the countryside. And they realized that, for instance, if they want to develop ECG machines for the rural market, these machines cannot be big. They have to be portable. They have to fit in a doctor's bag because typically the doctor will go from the city to the countryside on a day trip. They have to be highly affordable and very robust and run on batteries. So they came up with this kind of a prototype, a specification of a ECG machine that looks like that. They went one step further and said, instead of developing this machine in a way that we would traditionally do it, let's copy our Indian and Chinese competitors and do Jugaad. Let's take off-the-shelf components, cut and paste them, and come up with a solution faster, better, cheaper. So for instance, we know we need a printer. Let's see, maybe we can use bus ticket printer components, including the paper, that would be cheaper. We need keypads. Telephones have keypads, we can use those components. So they came up with the solution faster, better, and cheaper using this kind of Jugaad mindset. It was very successful in India. They had a similar product in China, and now they have FDA approval and are selling equivalent products in the West. Nokia, when it dominated emerging markets, did so on the back of devices like this, the 1100 series, that was designed specifically for people living in urban slums in emerging markets. When in the late 90s, Nokia sent its people who were trained in anthropology to go and live in slums and observe how even low-income people were buying very expensive mobile phones at that time. And they noticed that people would then, because it was a prized possession, cover the phone in plastic to protect it from dust. And also at night, because they typically didn't have lights, they would use the light in the phone to see their way in the dark. So Nokia took back these insights, came up with this highly affordable, robust device that also had these features, a dust-proof keypad and a built-in flashlight. And this made this product a hugely successful product. It was the world's best-selling consumer electronics device until the iPod and iTunes. Now, around the world, and actually in the 2000s already, people even in remote areas in Africa and Asia had access to mobile phones. And so others like Vodafone could come in and offer services on mobile phones to people like this lady. So she could use, in Kenya, this lady could use this basic Nokia phone, not only to call her son who would be in Nairobi earning an income and talk to him, but also ask him to send money home in an emergency, which he could do by simply texting it to her, which she would receive on her phone as e-float, and she could then cash it in her local corner shop. So it was solutions like this called M-Pesa that did frugal financial inclusion, brought people who are outside the banking system into the banking system using what was already there: mobile phones, texting, local corner shops. They didn't have to create any new assets to do this. And once people had access to these micropayments, you could solve some of the problems like Harish Hande had in India of 300 rupees a month is too much, 10 rupees a day is not. This company, M-Kopa, can set up a solar lighting solution in the heart of a lady like this in rural Kenya. She may not have a bank account and be able to take a loan to pay the upfront cost, but she pays off that upfront cost in micropayments using M-Pesa on a weekly basis. That makes it easier for her, but also for M-Kopa, because they can monitor this solution digitally, remotely, and they don't have to send somebody to the village every week to follow up on payments. So we wrote that book on Jugaad in 2012, already 10 years ago, and it was all about frugal innovation in emerging economies. But when that book came out, there was a lot of interest in this idea of frugal innovation in the West, for the West. So my co-author and I, we decided to look at what was happening in the Western context. And we realized in the Western context, there was a new group of consumers, which we call prosumers, because these are not just passive recipients of products and services from companies. They're more actively involved in the socio-economic process. And they're driving three different movements that underpin a frugal economy. The sharing economy, where consumers like you and me, prosumers like you and me, can now directly trade spare assets with each other on some digital platform. Think about Airbnb, where we can, if you were coming to Cambridge and I had a room in my home, you could rent that room for a few days on this digital platform. The second pillar is the maker movement. This is where now small teams, sometimes of our students, can do things that only large companies or the government could have done 10 or 20 years ago. And not only in software, but also in hardware using digital manufacturing tools. And finally, the circular economy, where we have realized that our 20th century linear model of production and consumption is really unworkable. We would take raw materials from nature, make products and services that would be sold to consumers, would use them and then dump them. That is not sustainable, and it's also highly wasteful. Instead, we are going to a circular economy where we reduce, reuse, and recycle all the resources that go into products and services we produce and consume. All this is linked to the themes of your conference, to digital and sustainable business. Let me talk about sharing. I talked about Airbnb, and PwC estimated that in 2013, the sharing economy sectors were a pretty small part of the traditional rental sector. However, by 2025, these digitally enabled sharing economy sectors would be massive. How can something grow so fast? It can grow so fast because it is fundamentally frugal or asset light. Here is a quote from Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, who makes this point. He says, Airbnb competes with bricks and mortar hotel chains like Marriott. If Marriott wants to add capacity, say 30,000 rooms, they would take a whole year to do that, and they would have to spend time, money, people, resources, materials. Airbnb can create that capacity in 2 weeks because it's not creating anything new. It is taking what is already there and simply joining the dots. Now, let me talk about the maker movement. This is where small teams of students can do amazing things. For instance, this group of students from Northwestern in Chicago called Design for America, and here is Liz Kerber, one of them. There were 4 of them, 2 with a design background, 1 with an engineering background, 1 with a business background. When they graduated, they said, if you want to solve big problems in the world, you don't have to go to Africa or Asia. There are many such problems in the US, like this problem of hospital-acquired infections, which kills about 100,000 people every year in the US alone. What can we do about it? They went to their local hospital, they observed doctors and nurses, they talked to them, they saw that they care about hygiene, but there are many moments in the day when they cannot go to a wall unit to wash their hands or use the gel. So they went back to their little studio where they have some computing equipment and a 3D printer. They brainstormed. They said, what would a kid do? Well, the kid would just wipe his hands on his trousers. Okay, so what if we could take that gel, which is usually stuck to a wall, and have it clip onto the nurses and doctors' uniforms? Then they can just dispense the gel while they're walking between operations. So they came up with this device, the Swipe Sense. This is the prototype they developed in their studio. It has a digital component because every time you release some of the gel, it sends a signal to a wall unit that stores the data. At the end of the day, the doctor or nurse can upload this to their screen and they can see how they have done relative to themselves and other people in the hospital. They developed this prototype in their studio, but then to manufacture it, they didn't have a factory. So they decided to outsource the manufacturing. Then they said, well, we don't have an advertising budget. No problem, we can use social media. They didn't have money, so they did a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter and raised money. And finally, they didn't have a sales force to distribute it. No problem, they used Amazon to distribute it. So all the things needed to come up with an idea, develop a prototype, and then commercialize and sell this product could be done by 4 students using things that are available now globally, digitally enabled solutions. This is another one of our students. This is my own student at Cambridge, Eben. He was a mature student. He was doing his part-time MBA while he was teaching in the computer science department at Cambridge. He and his colleagues had noticed that fewer young people were applying to study computer science in Cambridge and actually across the Western world. They thought it's probably because nowadays it's very hard for them to tinker with hardware and to do any coding. So their solution was, what if we can come up with a very basic computer, microprocessor, you can see him holding it in his hand. If we come up with this, kids would have to tinker with it and combine all kinds of other devices and sensors, and they would have to code for it. And it would be so cheap that if they broke it, it wouldn't be a big deal. So they came up with this. This original one was about $30. They now have a $5 version. And they thought they would sell a few thousand units. They have sold several million. They sell about 7 million every year, not only to kids, but also often to their parents who are not just hobbyists, but often using them in the products and services in their businesses. Another one of my students, he took the Raspberry Pi, he gave it a cladding, he branded it Co-Learner, and he loaded it with the Khan Academy. The Khan Academy is the entire US school curriculum available in video form on YouTube for free. Now, he said there are lots of kids around the world who don't have access to the internet and may not have access to PCs. But in their schools, they typically have TVs. So this can be connected to a TV, and then the kids get access to all this content. We carry around very sophisticated network computers in our pockets. This company from UC Berkeley called CellScope has made a suite of medical devices that plug into the audio jack of the smartphone and enable telemedicine. So here is an otoscope, which enables a mother to take high-resolution pictures of the inner ear of her daughter when she has an infection and send those images to a consultant who's somewhere else. This device is a fraction of the cost of the standalone device, and it enables telemedicine. They have come up with many other devices such as dermoscopes and so on. 3D printers, this one is less than $200, and at that price, it is within striking distance of households. But if you cannot afford one in your home, you can always go to spaces, community spaces that are called tech shops or make spaces or fab labs, where you can get access to a whole suite of tools, including digital manufacturing tools like 3D printers, laser cutters, circuit board printers. But more importantly, you get access to a community of like-minded tinkerers that you can bounce your ideas off and get inspiration from. So the students from Stanford I told you about had to come up with a prototype for their course. So they went to a tech shop near Stanford in Palo Alto, and they had this idea of a blanket that the mother could use to swaddle the baby and keep the baby warm. But they realized that's not enough. You need something that will keep temperature fixed for a period of time. And they didn't know how to do that. But at the tech shop, they met somebody who happened to be a former NASA scientist. And he told them about these phase change materials, these waxy substances that can be heated through electricity or water in his pad and keep the temperature fixed. So this is a key component. Without this, this device would not work. This is Jane Chen, one of the students in that group with a fan who used to live in the White House. And when he lived in the White House, he actually supported this kind of activity by hosting a maker fair to celebrate this and to champion this. And the idea is not that this is just a hobby for fun, but that this is potentially a new type of manufacturing, a kind of high-end, high-value creating sustainable form of manufacturing where micro factories can regenerate cities. So you could have a micro factory, for instance, that doesn't make the whole car, but makes components, spare parts for the cars that are used in that city. Maker fairs have spread the world. Citizens go to these in cities, including with their children. Now, I've talked about a lot of frugal innovation as driven by startups, but what about large companies? Can they also? So my co-author and I, we followed up our previous book with another book called Frugal Innovation, which we published in 2015, which was all about how large companies can adopt some of these principles to do the innovation faster, better, and cheaper. And again, we looked at a lot of cases, this time of large Western companies, and we identified some principles that were driving their innovation. And here are 6 of the principles. I'm not going to go through each of these. I just want to focus on a few, and particularly given the themes of this conference, this one of creating sustainable solutions. And here is a case we look at of this company, French company called Tarke, which makes flooring solutions for office buildings, like carpeting and so on. And they had a very ambitious target of, in 10 years, becoming a fully circular enterprise, where all the resources that went into their products would be reduced, reused, and recycled. And this was not just a technical challenge, it was also a business model challenge and a behavioral challenge, because they had to move from a transactional approach where they would simply sell their carpets to a customer who would then dump them after use, to a contractual approach where they would offer flooring as a solution for, say, 3 to 5 years. They would retain control of the asset, and then they would reduce, reuse, and recycle it. I mentioned tech shops. Ford, the motor company, has partnered with Tech Shop in Detroit, and it sends its Ford engineers to the tech shop one afternoon a week just to have fun and to tinker. And after 1 year of this initiative, they found that it not only improved the morale of the engineers, but it also improved their productivity. They were generating more high value added patents from this process. And the final principle is how companies that are large can partner with smaller companies that are better at innovating faster. So Barclays, which is a large bank in the UK, knows it can develop apps in-house. It has the technology, the money, and the people, but it's very slow in doing that. And in a city like London, it is surrounded by fintech startups that are doing things faster, better, cheaper. So they partner with them in a very big accelerator in Mile End in London. A company called Techstars manages this for Barclays. They identify 10 cutting-edge fintech startups that are housed in this accelerator for 13 weeks, constantly improving their business model and their product. And while they're doing that, they are mentored by people from the main bank one afternoon a week. That helps the startups to learn about banking, but it also helps the mentors learn about technology. At the end of the 13 weeks, these startups pitch to a Barclays team who then make an investment decision. So I just want to conclude by saying that, you know, in my work over the last several years, I've noticed that large companies struggle with innovation. They struggle to do more with less. They struggle to be agile. They find it difficult to include excluded groups. Some of the solutions that Frugal Innovation offers them is giving employees time and space to experiment, like Ford did with Tech Shop in Detroit, or to engage with agile entrepreneurs like Barclays is doing with fintech startups in London, or to create this Jugaad mindset by going to emerging markets like GE, for instance, has done. For small firms, the challenge is just the opposite. They generally don't have resources, so they have to be frugal. They don't have structures, so they can be agile, but then they struggle to scale. They don't have the resources to scale. And that's the point when they can partner with large organizations like the Embrace Baby Warmer partnered with GE. But then the challenge is how to learn to partner with large organizations. So in reflecting on what this means for you academics, working across different parts, different disciplines in business, marketing, operations, HR, finance, entrepreneurship, etc., what does this imply for you, especially those who are interested in digital and sustainable innovation? I think three things. First, substantively, it helps you to engage with probably the most important question that we face at this point in our civilization. How can the global economy grow, especially in emerging markets, without bankrupting the planet? I think for that, we need new theories of innovation. How can we innovate faster and better, but cheaper and with less of an environmental footprint? That is the key question for us. And Frugal Innovation offers new ways of thinking about it, but also new methodology. We can engage with companies, with organizations that are trying out these new solutions, new technological solutions, new products, new business models. We can have them design them, and then we can run experiments in the field to see which ones really work, and then help them to scale the ones that work. So based on my work over the last several years, I really believe that the world needs this kind of frugal, flexible, and inclusive innovation. I think academics like yourself and myself from emerging markets can gain by engaging with those in developed economies and vice versa. And I believe that large and small organizations can work together to improve lives everywhere. Thank you very much. I will stop there, and perhaps if we have time, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you very much, sir, for sparing your valuable time to share the knowledge with us.